morning and welcome. Patriot Radio News Hour. Joe and Jason live on this Tuesday. I hope it finds you well. 800-951-0592. AllAmericanGold.com is the website. We got a big show planned for everybody today. Some days, you know, we give more information than others. We've got an update on banks that you are not going to want to miss. It's something where those of you that remember my father-in-law, Jim, remember Jim? He was a character for sure. But Martin Weiss was one of his favorites. You know, my father, he was around before the internet. You know, he was out in the gold industry before the internet, and he used to subscribe to all these publications. And one of his favorite was a guy named Martin Weiss. Martin's no longer with us, but his group lives on. His son now runs it. They rate a lot of things, okay? But one of the primary things they do is they rate banks. And how they rate things, just to give people a heads up on how they do things. They rate them, you know, based on, okay, we're banks and we're rating banks against banks. In other words, we're not saying, hey, you may get, as an example, hey, we may give you a B-plus rating. Now, that doesn't mean that we think you're awesome or you're really good. That just means compared to the other banks, this is where we think you shake out. They rate crypto. By the way, there's no A's in crypto. The highest rated crypto they have is Bitcoin, which kind of makes sense. The second highest rated is Ethereum, and then everybody else, you know, man, it's crazy how many there are. But we're going to update you. There's a new number about the solvency of the banks and the debate on whether or not your money is safe. And both, this is something that he was on Glenn Beck. And both of them will tell you, man, do not have more than $250,000 in a bank. Just don't do it because it's not guaranteed. But we're going to also debate whether the $250,000 is actually safe. That's all coming up on this edition of the Patriot Radio News Hour. But I do have breaking news. You guys know I'm a golfer. I love golf. We had that new Saudi golf league. I'm sure you've at least heard of it. Live Golf. They were paid hundreds of millions of dollars to lure a bunch of pros into this, and everybody was all upset because it's the Saudi investment fund. That's the money behind Live Golf. And of course they were like, 9/11, and they murdered the journalist. And of course Donald Trump, a big Live supporter. Now of course Live played a bunch of events at Donald's places, but absolute hatred between Live and the PGA is apparently over. Yes, the PGA and Live are going to merge, Jason, because I guess the PGA, the Saudis aren't so bad because they threw billions at the PGA. So now the Live PGA thing is over. We're back to, I guess, one golf league instead of two competing leagues, and all the bad things, all is forgiven if you have enough money.
I think that sounds like a sad day. You should have two golf leagues. I'm telling you, anytime you merge it into one, you only have one choice. It's not good for the golf lover.
You got to remember, why did they do it to begin with? Well, because they didn't like the one choice, right?
I have a feeling Liv got in there and started discussing things with PGA, and PGA started saying, well, these are all the benefits of being the only player, so why don't you join up with us and we'll give you these benefits? And I think that's probably what happened, Joe. It's the two entities decided we're better at controlling this thing all in one, and I'm guessing the Saudis got a mighty fine piece of the action.
Yeah, well, I think the Brooks Koepka won the PGA Tour event. He's a live golfer, and I guess that was probably enough to say, okay, well, God, if you guys are going to go out and win majors, we better get everybody back in the fold. But yeah, so it just kind of interesting, all the details. They won't give specifics other than billions, right? You know, when it starts with a B, all of a sudden, you know, how much golf can you afford, right? I guess that's going to be the big thing on all of this. Of course, I think the best tournament in golf right here in Arizona, the ISO, but I guess I'll be correct, the Waste Management Open. It's how it should be, which is one big party. But having said that, Coinbase and Binance have both been sued now by the SEC. If you guys have been wondering about why crypto's been getting hammered over the last few days, that is why. The SEC bringing charges alleging that the crypto creators broke U.S. security rules. So any doubts you had about crypto being independent, I think that's over now, Jason.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of like the stock market. You know, the IRS deemed cryptocurrencies, you know, as an equity. So, you know, it's going to have the same principles
let me
as the stock
just
market.
read it to you because you're right, Jason. They made it real simple. Coinbase, we allege that Coinbase is subject to securities laws. Commingled and unlawfully offered exchange, broker deals, and clearinghouse functions. Hey, you can't do what you want. You're a security. We'll be back after this. (800-951-0592) Patriot Radio News Hour. Joe and Jason here on this Tuesday. Quick look here at the markets. The Dow is down, not a lot, down about 4 points. The S&P's up 8. The Nasdaq's up 40. Gold's up a couple of dollars. Silver's down a couple of cents. It's a pretty boring Tuesday in the markets, but as you know, we've been warning now the second half of this year, we are going to see the next leg of the banking crisis start to unfold, which is why you got to check out our good friends over at YRefi. Something not correlated to the stock market, not correlated to the banks, not correlated to interest rates. Doesn't care. Are they going to pause? Are they not going to pause? How many more banks are going to fail? Are more banks going to fail? Is my money safe? Is my if I have less than $250,000, is that safe? We're going to talk about that next. But check them out. InvestYRefi.com. That's the word invest, the letter Y, REFY.com. Or just call them at 888-YRefi24. That's 888-YRefi24. And Jason, you got to remember, you got to have 50,000, right? We all know that. Got to have at least 50,000. You can use an existing IRA. Some of you can even use a 401k. That's what they told me. I'll try to get more clarification on that the next time I talk to Lane and his guys over at YRefi. And again, after this clip too, I'm going to give you Joey was on yesterday. I'm going to give you his number again. I'm telling you, listen, I don't beg people to do anything. You know what you need to do. If you've been listening to the show, you still haven't bought gold and silver, that's on you. Right? That's on you. I've been doing this for over 20 years. And guess what? It's been a pretty good deal for 20 years. And you know what? It's going to be a pretty good deal for the next 20 as well, because it's the same problems, only magnified. After this clip, there's a couple calls you're going to want to make. First, you want to call us. Then you want to call Joey. Then you want to call YRefi. Get your crap together. Stop being lazy. By the way, Joey's number 602-909-9048. So, as we alluded to, this is White's ratings. You guys can do this on your own. You can go right out to their website. You can see all the ratings for yourself. They have been doing this, I want to say, for 50 years. And Jason, way here. But if everybody was listening to Weiss and not the Federal Reserve, I think since the financial crisis, there's been over 500, and I think Weiss called all but a few, right? They only missed a handful.
Yeah, Dallas Brown is going to cover all of that in this clip that we're playing. And I find it interesting because, even Weiss is a ratings agency that's keeping an eye on this stuff. The Fed does keep an eye on this stuff. And so when I was watching this video last night, it occurred to me, well, the Fed's doing the same thing. They don't like to say it out loud, but I've mentioned a couple of times, 722 banks were 50% or more underwater with their assets as of third quarter of 2022. And so this guy has a different number.
Right.
That's 2022. So we're... I was just going to say, Joe, we're further down the road now, and this guy Dallas Brown's going to have another number, and it just seems to me that we've increased that 722. I'm going to let Dallas Brown give the number up, but it's showing that this is a rapidly deteriorating situation, Joe.
Yeah, Stanford updated the number earlier at half the banks. We've got a new update there, and I just want to point out to people, Jason's so right. The Fed's supposed to do this. Do you know that the 3 banks this year? The big 3. They weren't even on the Fed's list of troubled banks. Through the Freedom of Information Act request, Martin's Wall Street on Parade, Jason, they got a hold of the Fed's list of because the Fed doesn't tell you. They don't want you to know if your bank's on the list or not, right? Because what would you do if your bank was on the list? Well, I'm going to get my money out of there, right? Which, heighten the process. Those 3 banks weren't even on the list, Jason.
Which I find interesting because we're going to play the entire clip. But at the end of the clip, there's Dallas Brown and Glenn Becker's like, hey, by the way, if your bank is on this list, don't pull your money out. And I was sitting there, and Brooke was sitting there with me. I was like, well, if my bank's on there, that's probably the first thing I want to do is pull it out. Why are you telling these people not to? You go, well, you don't want to cause the panic.
We're going to get to that. Listen, let's not ruin it. We're going to get to that because it's an interesting debate. I'll tell you, the debate they're having is interesting. Let's get to the clip.
All right, here we go.
All right, Dallas Brown, welcome to the program, sir. How are you?
Hey, Glenn, how are you doing?
I'm good. So I don't know if you know much about me, but I tend to think that we are running a shell game with our banks and our Federal Reserve and our central banks and our Treasury. And I think we've done such damage to our banks, and they are just printing money to keep everything looking like it's okay. I saw so that's my point of view, so you know where I'm coming from, and I want you to correct me, and enlighten me if you have anything better to say. I have not heard of Weiss ratings before, but I know you guys have been around for about 50 years, and in the last bank crash, I think you guys were the ones leading the way saying, trouble. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, so we did. So I can get to both your points really quick, but let me just jump in and tell you who Weiss is and what we've been doing. So this analysis we did isn't something that we just did one time. We rate banks and many assets, stocks, insurance companies, bonds, and crypto daily. And so we see the movement that happens based on liquidity of banks, capitalization, stability. And so we're very vigilant. Our analysts are very vigilant about this. And so Weiss has been doing this. They started rating banks in 1971.
Okay.
And so Martin Weiss is the founder, and his father, actually back in 1930, his name is Irving Weiss. He predicted the failure of the Bank of United States. And so that's where the catalyst of this came. And so in 1971, he got together with his son, and they started rating banks for safety for consumers. And so we rate every bank. And so it's not just banks, it's also credit unions. And so in 2008, we named in advance warning all the major banks that failed during that financial crisis.
I mean, you were I think the only guys that said Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers are going.
Yep. So it was like weeks before Bear Stearns, and it was like 100 and some odd days before Lehman Brothers that we announced that they're gone. Like it's an end game with them. But since 2008, there's been 539 bank failures. And we have given advance warning on 535 of those. And some of those other ones were fraud. Yeah.
Okay.
And so this isn't something that we take lightly here. It's important. It's important for consumers, but we kind of agree with you. It's not the bank's fault 100%. It is the government. It is the government forcing them to push this money out, not letting the free market play a key role in regulating the banks. And they just keep stepping in to protect banks, protect them from the market, and it's created this monster that's going to be tough to fix or save. Honestly.
Right, and it's only really benefiting, at least at this point, the big banks. Everything keeps getting folded in to these banks that we said were too big to fail, and so we got to make them smaller. Back in 2008, they're just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, it feels like we're going to end up with, well, just a Bank of America.
Well, hopefully that doesn't happen, because that's not good for anybody in our country at all.
Right.
I was talking with a president of a regional bank not too long ago, and he was talking about a nationalized bank, and I'm just like, why are you even talking about this? This is not something that we want to be discussing. Like,
correct.
We need the privatization. Yeah.
So go ahead.
This is what we found. Yeah, this is what we found. So is because of how quickly they raised interest rates, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of banks that are holding bonds. And when someone comes and does a bank run, or we have a lot of people taking out deposits, especially ones that have high uninsured amounts. So that's people that have over 250. The banks start having a crisis. And if they don't have the liquidity, or they don't have the cash to cover those, like a typical bank run, they have to sell their bonds. And on their balance sheet, the bonds are marked or held to maturity. And so they have them marked as if they were going to sell them in 10 years and 20 years and 30 years. But then they have to take them now, and they take a loss, right? And so after that, if their money that they're taking exceeds the capital, it's a game over for the bank. And then somebody has to step in and save them. And we only have two options. Either we bail out regional banks if this starts happening, or we sell them to the bigger banks and we lessen the free market.
Okay, so this is what I read, a week or two ago. 1,210 institutions, that's banks and what do you call them? Credit unions.
Credit unions. Yeah.
That's 12.8% of our banking system got a red warning flag signaling risk of imminent failure. 3,000 received a yellow warning flag indicating risk of failure in a financial crisis or recession. And 45% of all banks and credit unions were deemed vulnerable. Well, if the 12.8 go down, then you have a financial crisis or recession, and that just triggers the other 3,000, does it not?
So a lot of these banks are teetering, right? They're getting loans from other banks, or they're selling their assets to be able to cover if any type of run happens. So what we're saying is there are 12% or 1,210 institutions are at a point where if anybody decided to start pulling money out, or we had some sort of small panic, they're not surviving. It's not happening. And that is a lot to do with the fact that they don't have the liquidity based on the short-term and long-term demands on their bank. And so when we rate banks, we have 5 different ratings, and there's 154 different data points we look at within that rating, and then we compare them to the stability across all of our data on those banks. And so we compare 6,000 data points to figure out what is the stability of this bank. And then we rate every bank A through E. Okay? And so A and B are more stable. C is in a vulnerable. That's the yellow flag, right? Mm-hmm. And then D and E are the red flag. But there's quite a bit, even in that yellow flag, that if we hit a recession or we come into a new financial crisis, they do not have the liquidity or the cash on hand to be able to survive.
So what does that mean to the average person? I've been telling people, don't pull your money out of a bank unless unless I think you're foolish for putting more than.
Go ahead, Joe.
So before we get to this point, because we're coming up at the end here, and that we're going to debate, I want to regroup here. So what they're saying is that there are the red flag banks. Okay, these are banks that, according to Weiss, hey, anybody starts pulling deposits, these banks are done. There doesn't need to be a crisis. There doesn't need to be a panic. You start pulling money out, they're done. Then they have what they call those are the red banks. Then they had the yellow banks, which was, hey, a recession, a crisis, those banks are done. I'll give you I want to reiterate that number, and then we'll get into the heart of this.